Hello, everyone. Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be talking about how I personally would manage Marvel related animated content differently on Disney Plus if I were in charge there. How I would have run things differently dating back to the inception of the D Plus streaming service. First things first, though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and movie reviews. Recently, I've begun doing opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. To date, I've released 3 books: The Women in White, The Lethal List, and most recently, Textbook Murder. They're all on sale now, and there are purchase links in my video description below. With that in mind, and without further ado, I'm going to dig right into my topic for today. So I was prompted to make this video after learning of the general failure of Disney Plus's more recent attempts at making animated Marvel content. By failure, I mean the lukewarm performance of What If Season 1 and the fact that nearly every other planned Disney Plus animated Marvel project has been canceled, indefinitely postponed, and or hit with a wave of fan backlash. The stalling of What If Season 2 and the delays and audience pushback surrounding Spider-Man Freshman Year and more recently X-Men 97 are just the most glaring examples to me, and it just kind of got me to thinking about it. Make no mistake, nearly none of Disney Plus's planned Marvel animated projects have been canceled. Most are still in development, or in the case of What If Season 1, have been released to decent reception, but I just haven't seen the universal love or anticipation for those projects that existed for most of the peak Marvel animated series and films that came intermittently between 1992 and about 2013. And I've seen way more negative attention drawn to the art styles or content or radical woke aims of the people behind Disney Plus's proposed new animated Marvel content. And like I said, it all just got me thinking about how exactly I personally would handle Disney Plus Marvel animation differently if I were in charge, how I would have handled it differently from the start of Disney Plus in 2020. My leadership style would be based on 3 major points of focus, but those 3 points are all subsets of the same simple mission statement that would govern my operations. Treat the audience with respect. Once again, for anyone who's sleeping at the back of the class right now, treat the audience with respect. Give the audience what it wants, or at least what it doesn't know it wants, not what maybe 100 vocal members of that audience on Twitter say that they want. At the close of the day, the audience is what keeps any entertainment company afloat. That's a lesson that Disney's Marvel creatives seem to have forgotten since the day after Avengers Endgame released. The day they kicked off plans to transform their content into a running DEI sermon featuring the emasculation of anything remotely resembling a white man. And I know the counter argument that's probably coming at me right now: Disney Plus is still one of the biggest streamers on earth, and the MCU still outperforms every other film franchise in history. Yes, it is, and yes, it is. But Rome wasn't built in a day. The MCU got as big as it is right now with basically 11 years of brilliant hard work between 2008's Iron Man and 2019's Endgame. The MCU grew to be so big because it spent those 11 years delivering solid movies and TV shows with very few misfires. So of course I'm not saying that the MCU is dead or that Disney is on life support because of one 4-year phase of crappy content between 2019 and 2023. But I am saying that that could be the case given, say, like another 11 years, if Disney and the MCU keep disrespecting the audience the way that they are now. Because really, most major studio failures do start with small, isolated wrong turns that never get corrected before they dead end. Okay, like I said at the start of this video is about Disney Plus Marvel animation specifically, not the MCU or Disney in entirety. So I'll get off of my soapbox there and just move on. Also, like I said earlier regarding Disney Plus Marvel animation, my Respect the Audience operation plan of leadership breaks down into three major focuses that would govern my leadership of how I would do Disney Plus Marvel animation differently, and I'll cover those now. First, stick with sure bets. Before the 21st Century Fox buyout, Disney already owned rights to most animated Marvel series that have aired in recent history, but after the buyout, Disney gained the rights to all the rest except, I think, The Spectacular Spider-Man. That one is in limbo because of legal reasons involving Sony. But Disney owns the other shows. They're all even available to watch on Disney Plus. So Disney Plus has carte blanche to revive and continue literally every animated Marvel series that most Marvel fans remember fondly. Every show that was a ratings giant back in the day and that still has a devoted fan base. Those shows include, but are not limited to, X-Men the Animated Series, Spider-Man the Animated Series, X-Men Evolution, Iron Man Armored Adventures, Wolverine and the X-Men, and Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Those shows were all critical and fan successes in their times. They all have built-in audiences, built-in vocal audiences that would readily buy a D Plus subscription if it meant seeing a continuation of those shows in some capacity. Most of the cast members from those shows have affirmed that they'd reprise their roles for a revival series in a heartbeat if asked, and many of the creatives behind those shows have expressed similar sentiments. For example, Josh Fine and Chris Yost, two of the genius masterminds behind Wolverine and the X-Men and Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, have repeatedly expressed willingness and desire to come back and make more of those programs. Josh even recently did 2 cool YouTube interviews with Chainsaw Reacts, in which he talked about plans that he would love to implement in future seasons of those shows if he got the opportunity. What I mean to say is that all those shows are sure bets, well-tested hits with loyal fans, casts, and creators who'd return readily for more. And in the case of a few of those shows, like Spider-Man the Animated Series, or X-Men the Animated Series, or Wolverine and the X-Men, they got canceled prematurely, which would give older, devoted fans and newer fans who discovered those shows more recently all the incentive in the world to subscribe to D Plus to watch more. So if I had been running Disney Plus's Marvel animation efforts in 2020, I would have played it safe and begun the D Plus foray into new Marvel animation by announcing revivals of all the series that I named earlier on. If D Plus had made it a priority to greenlight, say, a wrap-up season for the unfinished Spider-Man the Animated Series, or a second season of the tragically unfinished Wolverine and the X-Men, or a third season of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, rather than commissioning and fast-tracking all this speculative, risky, new animated content, their Marvel animation would probably be a much bigger hit with audiences and critics by now. Seriously, what if Season 1 wasn't a bad show, but it was an acquired taste, and it did, by definition, come with way less of a built-in fan base than some of those older, tried-and-true shows that I mentioned? So if I were running things, yeah, I might eventually greenlit a project like What If, or Spider-Man Freshman Year, or whatever, but I likely would have done that in year 6 or 7 of Disney Plus, after I scored a few years of layups with critics and audiences by releasing revivals of more popular and better tested Marvel animated content. I get that part of Disney Plus's plan with the animated stuff was to hype up the multiverse by saying the animated projects take place in an alternate universe to the MCU or several alternate universes. But here's the thing. I think reviving and expanding sure bet animated projects could accomplish the same effect. For example, you could establish in, say, an episode of a revived Spider-Man the Animated Series or Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes that those shows exist within the MCU multiverse. You don't specifically need What If to establish that connection. And as an added bonus, fans and critics probably would have connected better with revivals of Spider-Man the Animated Series or Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes than they did with What If. It would be a win-win. And before anyone comes at me, I'll go ahead and answer another counter argument that's likely on your mind. Yes, I know Disney Plus recently greenlit X-Men 97, but to me that hardly counts. That show only got greenlit because one of Disney Plus's woke radical writers, Beau DeMayo, pitched it to them first. It has very limited involvement by the original creators of X-Men the Animated Series, and Beau has already said that the show will be more so influenced by his own limited lived experiences as a black gay man than the actual X-Men source material. Anyway, second point. Stick with veteran, venerated showrunners who have a history of critical and audience success. Technically, that also sort of falls under my point about sticking with sure bets. I just said that if I had been running D+ Marvel animation efforts in 2020, I'd have made a priority out of initially playing things safe by appealing to critics and fans with revivals of hit Marvel animated shows of the past as Disney Plus exclusives. I also just talked about how many of the brilliant creatives behind those rockstar older series have affirmed willingness and or desire to return for revivals. Well, honestly, I would jump at taking advantage of that. Most of the people behind those older hit shows are legends in the field of animation and comic book artistry, with dozens of incontrovertible successes to their names. People like Josh Fine, Chris Yost, Avi Arad, Craig Kyle, John Semper, Eric Lewald, etc. To my knowledge, none of those people are currently attached to any D+ Marvel animation projects, and that is nothing but a disgrace. If I had been running D+ Marvel animation, my first thought would have been, we gotta get those guys back, both for revivals of their canceled hit series from back in the day and to help develop future D+ Marvel animated projects. Those are the people who need to be placed in charge of Marvel animation on Disney+. Like, just to circle back to X-Men 97 for a second, there is no way I would have revived X-Men the Animated Series, arguably a genre-defining show for X-Men fans the world over, then made Beau DeMayo the showrunner instead of Eric and Julia Lewald, the geniuses who created X-Men the Animated Series and who were largely responsible for the fact that it became as popular as it did. I've got nothing personal against Beau DeMayo, but his track record of cranking out solid Marvel animation is virtually nil, and most of his experience in that arena extends to his work as a junior executive developing series like Ultimate Spider-Man, Hulk and the Agents of Smash, and Marvel's Avengers Assemble, none of which really resonated with fans or critics. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Assuming that the original creatives behind the masterpiece shows that I just pitched were available, bringing them all back for revivals would be a no-brainer to me. Let the less talented guys like indeed Beau DeMayo work underneath and learn from the masters. And then, once the less talented guys become proficient at telling solid stories in Marvel animation, let them branch out and maybe run or co-run their own projects. This has been a pattern with Disney Plus's handling of projects recently, a bad pattern that needs to be broken. They hire young, hardly seasoned, feminazi, woke radical writers who are better at articulating themselves on Twitter than in scripts written for TV. They toss those people carte blanche on major projects that adapt timeless source material. They pump a bunch of money into said projects, thinking that assures a quality product, and they just roll the dice to see what happens next. I suspect Disney Plus tends to do this because the younger and less experienced creatives come cheaper than old pros likely would, and they're likely also a bit more malleable than old pros would be. A newer and untested creative might, for example, bend down and not fire back when Disney tells him to include or not include something in a series. An old pro is going to be more likely to think, this is my show, I know what makes it good or what doesn't. I don't need the studio interference. Suffice it to say, if I were in charge of D Plus Marvel Animation, my mission would be to install talented old pros as showrunners on my projects, not just woke yes men. Okay, third, leave personal politics, messages, and themes out of the equation. There's a quote by Peter Jackson, who is, of course, part of the legendary team that made the original 3 Lord of the Rings films, aka one of the most successful film trilogies in history with both critics and fans, that I really think bears mentioning here. In an interview discussing making those movies, he once said, "We made a promise to ourselves at the beginning of the process that we weren't going to put any of our own politics, our own messages, or our own themes into these movies. In a way, we were trying to make these films for him, which is the author, not for ourselves." That's a lesson that I really think should apply to adapting any sort of timeless source material for television or film. There's a reason the source material was popular enough with fans to even warrant adapting in the first place, and usually that reason is that fans generally connected to the source material because of its entertainment value for audiences of all persuasions. I feel like most Hollywood producers, Disney Plus included, have forgotten a cardinal rule over the past 5 or so years, which is that the audience goes to church for sermons and to the movies for entertainment. It's not an entertainer's job to preach, but to entertain. That should be the first objective. Now, yes, entertainment should make people aspire to be better or do better, or at least realize that they can. In fact, most of the timeless Marvel comics, like Spider-Man or X-Men or Captain America or Iron Man, do teach sobering lessons about responsibility or honor or love. That's why those stories have survived for so long. But the most popular of those comics code those lessons into really cool, entertaining stories. They don't shove those lessons down the reader's throat like an out-of-control political rally. For example, X-Men. Part of the charm of the X-Men comic books is, or at least used to be, their universal nature. They could be applied as a critique of racism and prejudice, but they weren't written necessarily for that purpose. Stan Lee, may he rest in peace, even confirmed this on at least one occasion when he debunked the popular fan rumor that X-Men was written as a treatise against anti-black racism, with Magneto as a stand-in for Malcolm X and Charles Xavier as a stand-in for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So when I hear the original creators of the masterpiece X-Men the Animated Series say that the show is coming back as X-Men 97, but that they're only going to be consultants and that Beau DeMayo will be the showrunner, when I hear them say that D Plus is pumping more money into Beau's project than they had when they were doing it, and then intimate that that somehow guarantees success, when I hear Beau himself go on record and say he's going to take that show and relegate its themes to the confines of his own limited lived experiences as a black gay man growing up in a small Florida town, I hear a recipe for disaster at work. And I literally want to scream, do not make my entertainment your socio-political activism. It's an insult to the audience and to the source material. So naturally, if I were running Disney Plus Marvel animation efforts, if I had been when the streamer launched in 2020, I really would have been more mindful of screening projects to filter out the personal agendas and even the would-be showrunners who believe telling stories like that was a good idea in the first place. Treat the audience with respect. Stick with sure bets in producing content. Give creative control of that content to worthy creatives. Leave the personal politics and feelings and agendas on the cutting room floor. That's my own unsolicited recipe for how Disney Plus Marvel animation could have been truly great, probably would have been if I'd been in the driver's seat, and honestly still can be if the people behind Disney Plus Marvel animation wake up and do a major course correction before it's too late. To quote the late, great Stan Lee, "Nuff said." At any rate, let me know what you all think. How would you run D Plus Marvel animation differently? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Do you fall somewhere in the middle? Sound off in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, make sure to follow me on social media too. So long.